Hi, and welcome to this video where we're going to implement a super simple WebSocket server that is going to echo whatever is coming from the client and is going to send it back. And we're going to be doing that using Node.js. This video is part of a longer series. I think it's going to be called Fun with WebSockets or Creative Stuff with WebSockets. I don't know. But long story short, we're going to start this video by we already have a setup. We have Node.js installed in our system, and we have created the basic structure for a Node.js application, including the packages, and we have installed the WebSocket server package. So if you want to know how that is done, please go back, go to the playlist and check out my previous videos on how to get set up. Okay, so we're right here now at the time where we're about to start writing the actual code for the server. And for these videos, I'm going to assume that you have some familiarity with JavaScript. But if you don't, you're welcome to check Daniel Schiffman's videos on learning JavaScript. Or hopefully, if you see this in like long in the future, I may already have made a playlist on how to learn JavaScript and how to use it in Node.js. Okay, so let's get started. I have a folder. It's called server echo. I already have a package file that has information about the project, and I already have dependencies. As dependencies, I have the WebSocket package that I'm going to be using throughout this project. Now, the main entry file for this application is going to be one file called server.js, which I still don't have in my system. So there's two ways to do this. So for example, I could go to Visual Studio, create a new file, so file, new file, and then save this file in my server echo folder and call it, for example, server.js. All right. And if we do that, you can see that now I have the server.js file, which is empty, but Visual Studio is already giving me highlighting for JavaScript files. However, I want to show you the cool hacky way of doing this, which is when you install Visual Studio Code on your system, Visual Studio Code also has a way of being accessed through the terminal. So here on my right-hand side, I have PowerShell, which is living on the folder where I have my code, so the server echo folder. So what I can do is when you install Visual Studio Code, you are given this new command called code, which gives you access to functionality from Visual Studio Code. So what you can do is from the terminal, you can type code and you can say, for example, server.js. And what that will do is that it will create a new file, whatever that is, so in server echo, and then it will call it server.js, all right? And it will open Visual Studio right away with that file. So if I save this file now, you can see that this file has been saved to WebSocket server echo, and now I'm ready to start typing here JavaScript code. So console log, for example, hello WebSocket server, right? And I'm going to save this, and then from my command line, I can type node, and then I can type server and press tab to autocomplete. And you can see that node just executed the code in my server file, which is basically just a simple dump on the console. So I have now a very simple Node application with one line of code, like a hello world kind of thing, which I can execute from my runtime, which is Node.js. Again, with Node.js, I can type node, and then I can type the name of any JavaScript file, and it will execute the code in that JavaScript file. We've seen that in previous videos, I believe. Okay, so at this point, we are ready to start writing the code for our WebSocket server. So the first thing that we're going to do is in our code, I'm going to remove this. And then what I'm going to do is, first of all, remember how we said that we imported this dependency, the WebSocket library. The first thing that I need to do is to bring in all the code of that WebSocket library into my application. The way to do that is I'm going to create a variable that is going to be a constant, so const, and I'm going to call it WebSocket. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to import all the code that is living on my WebSocket library. So I can do that with require and then type in the name of the library that I'm importing. And I have a typo here, WebSocket. All right. If I do that, now I have my WebSocket server. I have my WebSocket library there, which I can use to create a new server. Creating a server is a super easy thing. So for example, I'm going to create a new variable called WebSocket server. And then I'm going to use the WebSocket object to create a server. So I'm going to say new WebSocket dot server. And then here you can see that the constructor of this object takes some options. The options are typically a JavaScript object, something like this. So I can open and close curly brackets. And in here, I can specify any information that I want to pass into the constructor to give me information about what kind of server do I want to create. One super basic thing that we will always need to handle when creating servers is which port those servers are going to be living on. We're not going to get into the details of that much, but for this example that is going to be living on my machine for the time being, we're going to choose any random value. So for example, I'm going to just choose 5,000. Okay, and that's going to be fine. So as I do that, you can see that my WebSocket server has been created. And then just for the sake of making sure that we have things under control and we have some feedback, I'm going to dump some message that says, hey, we started, we're listening, etc., etc. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to log, for example, I'm going to say new date so that I get information about new date, and then here server is listening on port 5,000, for example. And actually, why don't we do this a bit more programmatic? So I'm going to declare a new variable called the port, and that's going to be port 5,000. I'm going to use that as the object that I create the server with. And then here, I'm just going to use that also to specify what are we spitting out. Let's take a look. Let's save this, and then let's see if it works. So I'm going to execute this server again, and it looks like things are working. So I have a dump here that says blah 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 time whatever February 19th. If you're watching this from the future, 2021, great year so far. And then the server is listening on this particular port. And I want you to notice how the script has not ended. You see this blinky cursor here? That means that my server is alive. Even though it kind of has finished executing all this code, but this is part of what I was talking about in the previous video. Because it's an asynchronous event-driven runtime Node.js, then it's very useful for applications that simply just wait for things to happen and then react to those things. Like, for example, a WebSocket server. So my WebSocket server right now is waiting for incoming connections. It's just that there's no incoming connection. So let's do something with this. Okay. So first of all, let's test that this WebSocket server is actually valid and it's running. The way I'm going to do that is by using a test WebSocket client and use that to connect to my server. How am I going to do that? We're going to write an actual WebSocket client in the next videos, but for the sake of speed, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open Chrome, and in Chrome, I already have it installed, but for example, Chrome extensions WebSocket client. And if you do that, you will probably land into this application, which is kind of very popular. So I already have it on my Chrome, but you would have here a button that says install, etc., etc., which I already have it here. So under extensions, I have a simple WebSocket client, which I can use to test connecting to a WebSocket server. Now, if I click on the WebSocket client, I get to this window right here that asks me for some information. So where is that server located? Well, because right now my server, which is this Node application that is running here, and my client, which is the Chrome extension plugin, they're both different processes. One is the server, the other one is the client, but they're both living on the same physical machine, which is my computer. When that happens, what I need to do is I need to specify an IP that means don't go anywhere in the wild, don't go to the internet, just stay here on my local machine. That IP is typically referred to as localhost, and the number for that IP on every machine on the world is 127.0.0.1. This very particular sequence of numbers, 127.0.0.1, is the IP of a local host, which we always use to refer to any process that is living on the same machine where the process that we're specifying is living. If we want to connect to a WebSocket server that lives somewhere on the cloud, it will be a different thing. So we need to specify that, and because we are on the same machine as well, we also need to specify the port on which my WebSocket server is living. So I'm going to write a colon, so 2 dots, and then I'm going to specify here 5000, which is the port on which my WebSocket server is living. If I click open, this should open, all right, and it looks like it's working, even though I don't really get any feedback here. We're going to work on that. And then I'm going to send a request like, hello server. And then I'm going to send this. This is what I sent, but I also don't get anything in response. Why is that? Well, this is because I have created probably the most stupid WebSocket server, which is a WebSocket that is running, but is doing absolutely nothing. It doesn't listen to connections. It doesn't send anything back. It's just the dumbest server ever. So what I would like to do is I would like to actually write some code on the server that listens to connections, to incoming stuff, and then is able to respond back to that stuff. What we're going to do is we're going to implement an echo server, which is a really simple way of implementing a basic WebSocket server. An echo server is any server that responds to the client with exactly whatever the client has sent to the server. So if the client says hello, the server will respond hello. If it says whatever, blah, 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 it will respond the same thing. And actually, out there in the world, in the wild, there is a very popular debugging WebSocket server out there, which is called the Echo server. So WebSocket Echo, yes. So you can see here in WebSocket, which is, I guess, the organization that runs this. Here, this is the address of a permanent WebSocket Echo server that lives in the cloud. So if I go back to if I close my connection, my simple WebSocket client, and now I replace this with an actual WebSocket server that is living on the cloud, for this one, I don't need to specify the port. So if I open this, you can see that I just open this server, and then now I can send this message to hello server, and hello server responded with the same thing. So I say, hi server, and I send this. The server responds with the exact same thing. Boo! And then I get the same response. Okay, so this is happening because I'm connecting to some server out there in the wild, in the internet, that is doing this echo logic. So, all right, so I probably want to implement the same thing here on my own server. So let's take a look at how to do that. So let's go back to our server code. Let me disconnect from the WebSocket, the Echo server, whatever. Let me minimize this. And let me also stop the server process that is running on my machine by pressing Ctrl+C to stop the process. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to write now some code that I'm going to write the logic that I want to embed in my WebSocket server. What I'm going to do, well, the way this works, and this is very specific to the way JavaScript works, is that we're going to be doing this by implementing events. Events means that we can write code that instead of just executing on a loop infinitely, what it does is it listens to specific things happening, and whenever those things happen, they execute a function that responds to that event. All right. So very typically in JavaScript, the way we do that is, for example, we have the WebSocket server object, right? So if I click dot, it probably has a bunch of properties, and one of them is called on. On is super typical for defining the behavior that should happen whenever an event is raised. So there's typically a lot of verbs. So for example, we will see this better on the client side. But for example, for the server, a very typical event is a connection. So you can see that there are other events like close, error, headers, listening, whatever. But if I open and close curly brackets and I choose connection, then I can specify here a function that is typically referred to as the callback, which is a function that will be executed whenever a connection is established to the server. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to write function, and then I open and going to close parentheses, and I'm going to open and close curly brackets. All right. Now, this function, when Node.js executes this function, is going to give this function some data to work with. And the data is going to be an object that is representing the incoming client that is connecting to the server. That object we typically refer to as the socket. So for a WebSocket server will have a lot of sockets connecting to that client, sorry, to that server, and then we will be able to use those objects, so those sockets, as a way to interface with the clients. So I'm going to name this the socket, all right? And then here, inside of the function, I'm going to add behavior, and I'm going to add code that needs to run whenever any socket, connects to this server. So something very simple that I'm going to do. I'm going to say console log a client just connected, and I'm also going to do yes, a client just connected right now, for example. So let me save this. Let me run the server, and then let me go back to. I'm actually going to. Can I dock this here? I'm going to run this all the way up here. I'm going to show you how to do this in Visual Studio actually, because it's much nicer. All right. And then there you go. So now I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to type WS for WebSocket 127.0.0.1 and then 5000. Okay. I'm going to open the connection, and I would like you to see if we get any response as we get a connection. So I'm going to open, and you see that a client just connected, which means that this function executed whenever the client just connected. And then if I send stuff now, still not responding in this echo way. It's not responding because, so I'm going to stop the server, and I'm going to close the connection as well. It's not responding because right now we've only implemented this very simple spit some feedback on the console. And then what we want to do is we want to attach some behavior to the incoming socket. What that means is that what I would like to do is I would like to program something so that whenever I get information, whenever I get any data coming in from the socket, from the client, then what I would like is to do something. So the way I do that is also using events. So to this socket, to the socket that just connected, you can see that I also have the on method. The on method allows me to, if I open, you see, there's all these different events that I can respond to for the socket. So whenever, for example, I get a message coming in from this socket, from this client, then what I would like to do is I would like to respond with another function, with another callback function. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to define another function, and then I'm going to open and close parentheses, open and close curly brackets. And then here in the information, whenever I know, if I look at the documentation, I know that this function, whenever is executed, Node will also give this function, this callback function, some information. And for this particular event, for message, is going to be the actual message that was received in the server by the client. So let's make a very simple thing. So for example, whenever I receive a message from any client, I'm just going to print to the console, received message from client, and then I'm going to print out that message. All right, and I'm going to close here. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to execute my server again. My server is running. Okay, so now I'm going to open my connection. The client just connected, and then I'm going to send data to my server. So I'm going to send this boo, and you can see that now the server is responding with an action whenever it's receiving a message, which is printing that message to the console. So for example, another message, I'm going to send that, and you can see how it shows up here. The server is acknowledging and getting that information. And if I type whatever thing, I send that to the server, and the server is picking it up and printing to the console. All right, so we're almost there. Now the only thing that we need is to do the echo part. So now what we need is to send back to the client the same message that was sent. How are we going to do that? Well, we're going to do this here. In wherever inside of the function, whenever we receive a message, what I want is to respond to that client, to that socket with the same message. So the way to do that is by taking to the socket, can I send that message back? So on the same socket, I'm going to use the send method to send that very same piece of information back to the user. All right. Or just to make it a bit clearer, not the exact same one, take this back, and then I'm going to send the same thing with this prefix, okay, which is not exactly an echo, but you get. So I'm going to stop my server. I'm going to clean my screen. I'm going to start the server again, and then I'm going to close my connection, open my connection, clear this thing, and say, for example, hello, right? And then I'm going to send this. This got picked up by the server, and you can see that now the server is responding with another message that says, take this back, hello. And I can now type anything. I can send a boo, and then send it, etc., etc. And you can see that now the communication is working. The server is listening for incoming connections. The server is listening to messages that are coming, and is sending those messages back to the same socket, the same client that connected. And what's beautiful about this as well is that I can do this with multiple clients. So I'm going to keep this one open here, but I'm going to open a new tab where I'm going to open another socket client. Oops, I cannot do that. So can I do this on a different? Yes, so I'm going to have two different sockets here. All right, so 127.0.0.1. All right, I'm going to open the connection, and you see another client just connected. And I'm going to say, hello from the other client. And I'm going to send this message. I just received the message from the other client. It sent it back. Hey, I am still here. And then I'm going to send that. And I'm also receiving that message from the other. So both clients are now connected and sending information back and forth with the server. All right. So beautiful. So wait, but could we use this as a way of having both clients do this kind of chat, for example? Let me show you how to rewrite this server so that whenever a client sends information, that information is broadcast to all the sockets. Let me show you how that works. The way to do that is we're going to go back to the server. So I'm going to let me minimize all this stuff. Let me stop the server, and then I'm going to modify something here. So instead of sending the information back to the same socket, to the same client who sent the information to the server, what I'm going to do is I'm going to iterate over all the clients that are connected to the server, and I'm going to send that message to each one of them. But how do I know how many clients do I have, or how do I access them? Well, it turns out that this particular library has a very nice way of doing that, which is I'm going to broadcast that message to all connected clients. The way to do that is by saying, let me take a look at the WebSocket server, which has a property that is called clients. Clients is basically an array that has a copy of each one of the sockets that has connected to this server. And because it's an array, I can do things such as, for example, iterating for each one of them. So for each one of them, I can give it a function that will be executed with each one of the clients. So that's going to be a function, and the information that is given to the callback function is a copy of that client. So for example, I'm going to name that client, and I'm going to open and close curly brackets. And then here I have the client object, which I can use now to do whatever. So for example, the client object is the same type of object as the socket. So I can also do send, and then here send, for example, some message. For example, someone said this thing. Okay? Someone said this thing here. And this will be sent to everyone. So let's see if that works. Let's cross fingers. So Node server.js. So now I have a very simple server. It's running. So let me close all these connections and let me clear everything here. All right. So let me open a connection from my client on the right. So a client just connected, and then the other one on the left, I'm also going to connect it. So the both clients are connected here. So with this one, I'm going to say hello from the right client. I'm going to send this, and you can see that this client sent this, and this was what was received from the server, but that was also received on the other client. So now here I can say hello from the left client, and if I send this, you can see that the echo gets sent to both clients that are connected to the server right now, the left and the right. So if I say blah 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 blah, blah and I send this to the server, that gets broadcasted, is the technical word, to every client that is connected to the server. Ta-da! How cool is this, right? So with barely, if we compress this, it's barely 10 lines of code, really. With 10 lines of code, we have been able to create a very simple WebSocket server that accepts incoming connections from clients, and whatever message it receives from them, it broadcasts that same message to everyone that is connected to that WebSocket. This is literally the core, the basics of any real-time chat function or any real-time chat window that you can find in a browser. Okay? Awesome. So I think we're good for a simple WebSocket server. So what I'm going to do now in the next videos on this playlist is that I'm going to show you how to write a simple WebSocket client like this one from scratch. I'm going to also show you how to put this server somewhere on the cloud, so somewhere on the internet, so that it's not living on my machine, but it's living on the internet, and then we can all access this functionality online. And then finally, I'm going to teach you in the next videos also how to connect clients from other different platforms, such as Python, such as Grasshopper, processing, etc., etc. So stay tuned for the playlist. And as usual, if you like this video, feel free to like it, feel free to subscribe, and to feel free to stay tuned with all the work that we do here in Parametric Camp. But we're not done. Let's keep doing more awesome WebSocket stuff.